you say that they augment each other, or is it just?
Absolutely, and I can tell you exactly why.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
There's actually a good story about that involves Zach Penn, the guy who wrote Ready Player One, the movie.
Shirt, man.
I want one of those. I would rock that shirt.
Attention, you are now tuned in to Pass the Controller. Game roll, round table, show me your moves. How these noobs get good and get in the groove. Gears of war like Sonic hopping the tuck. You don't want the smoke, you'll get bodied by big knucks. Come for the character, stay for the content. Fans from the elite to the civic binding. Conventions are streamed, the topics deceased. So tune in, peace and hair grease. Let's go, baby. Peace and hair grease. Pass that, pass that, pass that, pass the controller. Pass that, pass that, pass that, pass the controller. Pass that, pass that, pass that, pass the controller. Pass that, pass that, pass that, pass the controller.
Hey, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. That's right. It's a special episode of Pass Control. That's right, people. School is in session. Get your notebooks out, man, because we have a lot to go over, man. We have a special guest, as you can see here. But before we get to our special guest, again, my name is Mark Knuckles Carter. McNucks to all of you gaming noobs out there as well. Get good as always. And before we get to our special guest, we got our usual here, our usual co-host, man. To your left, or to over here, you know, we got my man himself, the last boss on every stage that you can't beat without using a cheat code. What's up, Smoke? What's going on, man?
What's going on? And as you said before, Mark, we are in school. We are in session right now, and I'm the hall monitor, making sure that if you don't be in class right now, you're getting detention and maybe get kicked out. And right beside us is the man, the living legend himself. He's bald. He's beautiful. He is Brian, civic-minded, classic. What's going on, brother?
I thought you were talking about Howard Scott Warshaw for a second. I got so confused. I was like, he's going to skip me, isn't he? Okay. I'm Brian Lessick, otherwise known as Civic Minded. Anyway, enough about that. I'm excited. Okay. Today's show is a big deal. And we've been talking about this for a while, and the day has come. We have somebody extremely interesting, important, jovial, experienced, honest, and just all-around interesting, I would say, in the studio, but we don't have a studio right now, obviously. But we do have with us today the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Howard Scott Warshaw himself.
That's right. Let's go.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I want you to know that I got my coif all set up as a tribute to you, Brian. So thank you.
Thank you. See, I would have done the opposite and tried to grow my hair out, but I didn't have enough time. I love it.
Well, you know, you get tired of that after like 40 or 50 years.
I'm gonna tell you one thing though, because I'll keep looking at your old pictures, Howard, and I'm like, man, I love your hair and the beard combo, man. Like, oh man, I wish I kind of had that style myself right now, man. Like, well, first of all, I'm kind of losing hair myself. That's why I got the hat on. But yeah, I'm like, man, I wish I had like the hair and style that you had back then when you was young. I was like, man, that's a good look for you.
Mark, I hear you, because I wish I had it too.
Well, the way I look at it, I didn't want anyone mistaking me or for Brian or for Howard. I just wanted to make sure. I'm like, well, I don't want people to mistake it. Wait, is that Howard right there? He looks so cool without it. And I'm like, wait a second, that's Howard right there with the beard. He's chilling out and everything. But again, we want to thank you, Howard, for being on the show. And Brian, I wanted you to talk to us about how you got this to happen, man.
Well, I've labored over this for a while. How to introduce somebody that everybody probably already knows about. How do I give this man the right introduction? I have made notes after notes after notes, watched the documentaries, watched the movies, read his book, read other books about Howard Scott Warshaw. And I think the only way to introduce him, and Howard, with your permission, may I just read a quick little blurb from your book?
Absolutely.
Don't mind. This is, at the end of the book, I figured this is the best way to introduce him. In short, you are somebody who somebody very famous once referred to as a Renaissance man. That was Ray Kassar. And I can't put it any better, but maybe you can. So these are your words. This is, Howard Scott Warshaw is the most famous person you've never heard of. He's an artist, technologist, creator, and healer. But first and foremost, he's a communicator. Holding master's degrees in counseling, psychology, and computer engineering. His career accomplishments include video game pioneer, Museum of Modern Art artist, which I think is awesome. That is very cool. Celebrated software developer, award-winning film producer, author, educator, and columnist. And now we can add to the resume, Pass the Controller show guest. So again, welcome to the show. You, sir, are an absolute legend, and this is going to be a lot of fun. We really appreciate you taking the time. Where to begin?
Oh my goodness, it's a lot to actually go over, because again, when I was now it's an introduction. I remember we talking off stage, Howard, that we a lot of my co-hosts here, there are older gamers. They grew up in the same era as the Atari and all that. I'm a fourth generation gamer, and if people don't know what that is, I basically was born in the Sega Genesis era. So it's like, for me to go back and learn my history, as a gamer, to learn about you. And I told a lot of people, I was like, there should be like a gaming history month, because I would have wrote an essay about you easily. That's how interested and that's how in tuned I was into your life after looking at the documentaries, Atari Game Over, which everybody should definitely watch. And then of course there was the first episode of High Scores on Netflix, man, which you was a star of as well too. And then of course you had the cameo of the Angry Video Game Nerds movie as well too, which was funny. now, tell me about
that. Was great.
Yeah, tell me about that as far as the career, the life and career of Howard Scott Warshaw. Just give us like a little gist of it.
Well, the life and career, that's what the book's all about. This is my memoir about all that stuff, because it is a long and winding road. Not to steal from the Beatles, but if you're going to steal from the best, right?
Yes.
And it was, I've been in a lot of different things because for me, it's all about a new challenge and what's interesting and where to go next. Because what I'm into is two things. One is expanding my skill set. I always like to expand my skill set and check out new territory and cover new things. And the other thing I like is finding a way to take whatever I'm learning now and wrap it up with everything I used to know and have discovered before, so that I'm not throwing away some background to take on new background, trying to find new. So, I started off as a terminal engineer at Hewlett Packard, which was terminal's the right word to describe the feeling of that particular job. Gotta tell you, but I was a multi-terminal engineer at Hewlett Packard before I went to Atari and my life up. And after Atari was like trying to find the same kind of satisfaction, because one thing I never really had was satisfaction. You could say I couldn't get no satisfaction, but if I already brought the Beatles in, how can I go without the Stones, right? I mean, but this isn't just going to be a rock history review.
Right.
But
yeah, I guess
for me.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Keep going. No, go ahead.
Oh, so it's just the idea that trying to find new challenges, new adventures and things to do and finding ways to wrap them together. After Atari, it was decades long journey to try and find the next thing. And what happened was, what I learned at Atari was combining technology and technique with artistic and creative production, because most jobs require one or the other, and I need both. I need them bad. In fact, I need them so bad that after I left Atari, I started working two jobs because I couldn't really find a tech job that really demanded the kind of creativity that Atari did. Then again, I couldn't find a creative job that paid as well as tech jobs do, and my body was still addicted to food at the time. So, I needed to really rock it. And so I would do my tech job during the day and I would do creative stuff at night. And it took me literally decades through all kinds of things. I went through film production, photography. I've written columns, books, all kinds of things. And I've done almost anything you can do in technology, networking, compilers, video, all kinds of different stuff, machining, manufacturing, robotics. But what I always found was I have my tech job to eat and I have my creative job to nourish me. And I had to supply the creative job. So I was always doing something creative until I found therapy. And psychotherapy is the thing that wraps it all together, because psychotherapy is the first thing I've found that requires both the technical skill and the creative insight that Atari required. And I've been super satisfied ever since then, except I still need to do more creative stuff. So I wrote the book.
As a young kid, Howard, like, were you interested in as far as doing like tech, game design and all that too? Like, did you think as a young kid that you would that you wanted to be a game designer or a technician, engineer?
No, none of that. I mean, it's almost embarrassing, but to tell you the truth, I didn't know an engineer wasn't someone who drives trains until I was like my sophomore year of college. It was like, and then I became one, which was kind of weird. No, when I was a kid, well, there weren't video games, right? I was pre-video games. I loved games. I loved to play games, but I never at all considered the idea of maybe I could make a living dealing with games.
Right.
I was initially headed towards a business curriculum. I was going to be a businessman, and because I like giving people the business. So I figured, that's a natural for me. But I just thought I'll do business. I was studying economics. I was going to go on and try to do something in that field. But and I avoided computers like the plague. I actually stayed away from computers every chance that I got. And I had lots of chances. Yeah, it was weird. There was just something about computers I didn't want to get involved with.
Wow.
And about the middle of my sophomore year, someone said to me, if you're going to go anywhere in economics, you got to have computers. So I said, okay. I tried a computer course, and it was an amazing moment, right? It was like the middle of a semester. I walked into the guy he runs the computer science department, the School of Engineering, and I had this thing like I was a Tulane scholar. I went to Tulane University in New Orleans. Okay. And I was like, quote, a Tulane scholar. And as far as I could tell, the only thing Tulane scholarship got you was wine and cheese at the first few days of a semester at the president's house, and that's about it.
Right.
But it supposedly had academic freedom, or so you could do some stuff. So I walked into this guy's class, into this guy's office, and I said, hey, I want to pick up your course. This is 7 weeks into a 14-week course.
Mm-hmm.
I said, hey, I want to pick up your course. And he's like, yeah, really? I go, yeah, I'm a Tulane scholar, Like that meant anything.
Membership card.
Yeah, but he'd never heard of it, so that kind of made sense to me. Wow. But he said, okay, sure. He figures I'll give you enough rope to hang yourself. And it was like, and so he just gave me the book and pointed me at the computer center, and I went over there and punched. This was when we were still using punch cards. So I sat down at a hole punch, all the deck of cards, and you hand that to someone to run your program. That's what computing was like back before electricity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and it was like unbelievable. It was a discovery. It was a revelation. And I thought, oh my God, this is what I need to study, because I don't have to write papers. I don't have to read long, meandering books. I just can write them later, but I don't have to read them. And it's just solving puzzles. And I loved it. And so I just went whole hog into it. So I just blew off economics. I mean, I finished my economics major,
mm-hmm.
but the idea of going on in economics was done at that point. I just thought, computers, this is it. This is the thing for me. And so I pursued it.
So let me ask you this, Howard. As far as, like, to me, and especially back in the day with Atari, how does it feel to be like an early pioneer of game design? Because to me, a game designer is an artist that brings ideas to life on screen. How did that feel, being one of the early pioneers of game development and game designing? Because I know a lot of things go through your head when you're trying to figure out, like you said, the punch cards. How does one sit down and figure that out to make art and to come up with the concepts of, like, Yar's Revenge, for example, and to make that come to life, to make it all the intricacies come in and out and play out? How does one do that? Like, for you, like,
Eric,
how does that feel?
Eric, or if I should just say Mr. Smoke.
Just call me Smoke. You call me. Everybody calls me Smoke.
Smoke's good. Good. But I have to say, you are not blowing smoke there. That is a great question. And because it is something that's unique. And what it is there's this beautiful marriage that you find between intricate technology, which is so complex, nobody really knows how to do everything with it, and the idea of figuring out something to do with it that was never intended, because that's what video game making was about, right? You got to figure out a new gameplay. Now it's elaborating on a few. Now we have narrowcasting, right? Mm-hmm. We have a few different styles or genres of gaming, and people make them better graphics or better physics, and we elaborate the concept. But back then it was about defining new concepts, and I love that. I like breaking new ground. And so there's this complex technology, and then you got to think, well, what can I do with it that people haven't thought of, that people haven't even intended? And the idea that you bring up the punch cards is perfect, because although I never had this idea of moving into games until very late, I was always about whatever I have, what else can I do with it? And like with punch cards, one of the great things about computers is that it wasn't just that I have these punch cards and then the big fan fold paper, right, that we get the listings on and stuff. So it's cool that you have these big sheets of paper, you have these little punch cards that you do. But the great thing about the punch card was that you can take one and you can roll it up, mm-hmm. and you can lock it up with a rubber band, and it's a perfect joint protector. So you could put a joint inside the rolled up card in your pocket, and you knew it wouldn't crush the joint, which was important, because a crushed or broken joint it's just not the same thing by the end of the evening, right? Right. So I found that was great. And then the fan fold paper, the giant fan fold paper.
Yes.
Nowadays, who ever heard of having seeds in your weed, right? I mean, that's that doesn't happen anymore. But way back when, people used to actually smoke marijuana with seeds in it. And I got
Are you serious?
Technology is a great thing, right?
But the thing is,
we've come a long way.
That big fan fold paper was perfect for cleaning the seeds out of your weed, because you could fold up a little part of it at the edge, you break up all, and then how do you get the seeds out? You just sit there and you roll it. It's like, panning for gold. Yeah. Well, this was like panning for Acapulco gold and getting rid of, the seeds and stuff. So the idea that not only the stuff that I was using was wonderful intellectually and challenging academically, it was also very handy recreationally. I'm saying, this is firing on all cylinders. I have to go this way. And then when you get to a place like Atari, so you have people who made a system that was designed to do about, 6 or 7 games.
Okay.
Ended up hosting over 1,000 different games. So what you do is you sit there and you think, okay, I get what people planned to do with this system. And I can take the things that people planned on and see if I can do new things with that. Okay. But what about the things that nobody really saw? It wasn't that they didn't plan it or it just, this is what you call unearned increment, right? It's a byproduct. The thing is, whenever we do something with any complexity, it's got loopholes. It's got opportunities. It has bugs, but it also has features and it has things we can exploit. And with the 2600, the Atari VCS, it was all about figuring out how can I use this machine or abuse this machine in a way that no one has ever really considered. And what do I get from that? What do I get from that? So you just throw anything on the screen. And what I did, like with Yar's Revenge, especially, was to just find new and interesting and in particular cheap ways, or economical if you want to be nice about it, ways of approaching the system to get high impact, action on the screen for very little effort and code. And that's my thing, because I have a degree in economics. Okay. I had the background in computers, but people think my math and computer background was the thing that really helped me do well at Atari. I don't think so. I think it was my economics background and my theater background, because I also had a minor in theater when I was in college. Wow. And that's the stuff that really helped me see what can I do here? Because for some people, it's just about the computer and the code and all that. To me, a game doesn't take place on the processor. A game does not take place on the screen. To me, a game takes place in the mind of the player. So when I'm programming, I'm not programming to move bits into registers. I'm not writing code to make certain graphics appear. I'm writing code to make certain impressions occur in the mind of the player that's going to make a bigger experience. At least that was the mindset I brought to it. And that was awesome. It was awesome to be there and do that. And to your question originally, what's it like to be an innovator, to be someone who's defiant, to be a pioneer? I am not ashamed to say that Yar's Revenge does indeed contain, that was my first game. Okay. I did a lot of stuff in Yar's Revenge no one had ever seen before. There are things in Yar's Revenge that went on to become standards in the industry. And, one of my favorites is, Yar's Revenge was the first game to have a pause mode. Right. So remember, next time you pause a game and go take a break without losing any lives, say, thank you, Howard.
I want to rewind a second, because you touched on something, having to do with the gamer's mind and the programmer's mind. And one takeaway from the book that is available right now, it's called
Great book, by the way. I think I've seen that.
the one takeaway I had from this, and this comes from me, I have a psychology minor. Yay, big whoop. But I had to ask, because to be a game programmer, I think that you have to be very left-brained traditionally. And then to be obviously a psychotherapist, you have to be very right-brained, very artistic, very, outside of the box. And I can't tell, after reading your book twice and after talking to you now, and even after, the documentaries and everything, I cannot tell which one you are. You are equally both, which is, I think they say, impossible. How do you classify yourself, and how do you reconcile those two things?
Well, it's like the introduction you read at the start. It was a very clever guy who wrote that about me, I think. And what he said was that, if you really had to sum me up in 5 words, it's passion with a balanced perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because I think I am unusual in that I am very right-brain balanced, right? So the thing is, nowadays, when you're doing a game, you're going to have artists and game designers who are going to be more right-brained, and you're going to have programmers who are more left-brained. At Atari, there was one person doing the game. That was one of the beauties of it to me. Now it's a collaborative effort. Back then, it was a work of authorship. And I like that control. I like the ability of taking all the responsibility. It's tough if it doesn't work because it's all your fault.
Mm-hmm.
But it's beautiful if it does. And the thing is that programming is essentially a very left-brained activity, but game making is both a left-brained and right-brained activity. Right. Because like really left-brained people, they can do coin-op knockoffs, but they're not going to do original games. But original game makers, they still have to have the tech chops to be able to deliver their concept, at least back then.
Right.
Nowadays, someone who's right brain can come up with a cool game concept, hand it off to the left brain people who are going to go implement it, and that can work, right? And that's fine. It's a different challenge. It's a different experience. I love the idea of being able to bring both. And I just think I'm very balanced, right brain, left brain.
Yeah. And, you mentioned about Yar's Revenge. You mentioned about it's the first game that had pause feature, which we do thank you for, by the way.
Yes.
It's a number of firsts. It was the first game. Oh my Lord, where do you even begin? It had an Easter egg in there. It had your name sort of officially but unofficially attached because it came adjacent to its own backstory, which is in the form of like a miniature comic, which is awesome, by the way.
I still need to get really that cool. Too. Yeah.
That had never, to my knowledge, that had never been done before, right? That was a first.
No, it hadn't, and I wrote the story for that too.
Yeah.
So it was.
And it's a lot of theater of the mind. Back then, when the technology wasn't where it was today, it's almost like the old days of radio where you would tell a story, and in your mind's eye, it's this great adventure. But to supplement that, with Yar's Revenge in particular, it's hard for me to believe that was even your first game. You were. This is a weird parallel. I don't know. I hope you're familiar with who I'm about to mention, but Hideo Kojima. He's a big. We're a big fan of Hideo Kojima. Yep. And he's one of those guys that he just has such a great track record for great games. And his first games were as good as his last games. It's incredible. Like his hitting streak is amazing. And same thing with you in general. Your first game is going to be a Hall of Fame game. That will be an inductee, I'm sure. Is it not in the Strong Museum yet? I don't think it is, right?
I don't know. People have told me that there's like this Hall of Fame stuff, I know there's a National Video Game Museum. But I didn't know about, like, somebody told me, it's really a shame that Howard's not in the Hall of Fame yet.
Right, exactly.
And I'm like,
well, it's astounding to me because, I mean, Yar's is probably that's a first round pick for me. I think it was, honestly, I know you're sitting here, you're probably thinking, all right, but to me, that was probably the best game on the 2600. The VCS had a lot of good games, had a lot of bad games. But in my opinion, that was the best one, and Adventure was a great game too. Yeah. Again, like a very good theater of the mind kind of game.
Adventure was a great game, but if you're thinking of Yar's Revenge as the best game on the 2600, all I can say is, like, I hope you're not looking for an argument.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it on lists of other gamers who they go through the annals of time and say these are like your top 50 games. Now we'll get into that whole compartmentalization, top 10, bottom 5 game thing in a minute, but. That is a universally beloved game. I don't hear any hate for that game at all. So kudos.
That's a fun game. And, I know what you're alluding to, and you're right. I mean, about this thing, because there's also E.T. I managed to do E.T. Yar's Revenge frequently shows up as one of the top games of all time, and E.T. frequently shows up as one of the worst games of all time. Mm-hmm. Now, some people argue E.T.'s not so bad. I like it when people call E.T. the worst game of all time. I really prefer that. Because as long as E.T. is the worst and Yar's is like the best, I have the greatest range of any game designer in history. And I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
Let me ask you this, Howard. And I was going to ask you this later on as the interview progressed, but I'm going to ask you this now. With E.T., just like looking at a movie, if you look at some of the older movies that now are credited as cult classics, Evil Dead, for example, it was low budget and it really didn't have substance to a lot of the reviewers back then, but now it's a cult following. It's like it's bigger than life. E.T. looks to me is along that line. It's along that line because there are a lot of people out there like the documentary that basically are pining to look for this game. So, like you said, some people are going to say, oh, it's a great game. But to me, it's developed a cult following. How does that feel to know that not only you have one of the best games, but you also had a game that wasn't so revered, but now has a cult following? How does that feel?
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, I used to follow Rocky Horror Picture Show all over the country, right?
Yes.
I mean, I've seen that thing in like 8 different cities, I think, and all over the place. And so I always used to think, it's really cool. I mean, there are hits, right? But when you develop a cult following with a product, that means you've got people who are not subject to the advertising and hooked in that way. These are people who are really tuned into the value of the product. And so I think a cult following is a greater honor than just a top seller if it got a blockbuster advertising and a big marketing budget and it was there and it popped for a little while and then disappears. So things that gain steam and ground over time. Yeah. And I think it's true that E.T. has done that. I mean, E.T. became a lightning rod for haters, right? I mean, hater culture really landed on E.T. So a lot of people love to come up to me and say, man, you did the worst. That game sucks. That game is so bad. And I'm okay if that's their opinion. But what I always like to ask people is, have you played it?
Yep.
And it's amazing the number of people that will tell me how bad the game is, but have not played it.
But at the same time, I would tell them, hey, thank you for immortalizing me, because the game is, to me, the game is immortalized. Good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't matter. To me, that game is immortalized because we are still talking about it in 2021. We are still talking about the game that was almost 30, 40 years ago. So that you have to feel good, not only because of your games that you have done that are successful, but that one game that not so much overshadowed, but really stands out. Again, it really has to make you feel good when you're like, oh yeah, thank you. You want to handle
it overshadows. I'm comfortable with that. I mean, let's face it, E.T., you might say, creates a smoke screen behind which most of my other games sit, right? And you could say that, but the truth is, I just want to say this thing about it, is that one way that I look at video games, there's a lot of different ways I look at video games, as a media product, right? Video game is a broadcast media product. And you guys are doing media, right? You guys know what it's like about media. And to me, the goal of media is to inform, to entertain, and to generate social discourse. To me, that's a super successful media product, something that does all those three. And like you were just saying, Eric, I mean, the fact that we are now still talking about this game that was done. How many 2,600 games do we still talk about?
Yeah.
Not many.
That's right.
So as a media product, I feel it's generated social discourse. Look at the urban myths about it, all the attention it's gotten, all the coverage it gets. I created something with 8K of code like 40 years ago that lives. And I'm just very excited. I get goosebumps still when I think about this, but it's like, yeah, because I am also a writer and a director and a video producer and stuff. And so the idea that my product still commands any media attention is like, yeah, hit it.
Well, one of the things you bring up too, and this is also in your book, one of the contributing factors to E.T. was something that you felt maybe dated back to what went on with Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was your second game. And that the fact is, it was during a time when some of the games actually required you to read an instruction manual to understand what was going on. Games back then, unlike today, did not have in-game tutorials. They didn't have walkthroughs. A lot of players just expected to slap the cartridge in and know exactly what they were doing. And it was kind of like that coin-op mentality. Like, nobody goes to an arcade and reads the instructions with a quarter in their hand and says, okay, now I know how to play. You playing Space Invaders, you knew what you had to do. Playing Pac-Man, you knew what the objective was. You could take a screenshot, show it to a person that doesn't speak your language and say, what do you have to do? And it's a maze. You go through the maze.
It's clear, yeah.
With a game like Raiders, I think that like people could play it without an instruction manual, but it enhanced it knowing what you were supposed to do. It was an objective-based game. And the same thing with E.T. I'll give you my brief history with E.T. is that I grew up with an Intellivision. My friends had Atari. So it was different for me, and I did not play E.T. as a kid. So my first exposure to E.T. was later in life when all of a sudden the internet, it's the worst thing. It's the, okay, well, I have to play it now, Somebody tells you something in school like, hey, this tastes terrible. You try it.
Yeah.
So I tried it and I played it. And honestly, my only criticism initially was I just didn't know what I was doing. That's it. But the game played fine. It functions. It works. I just didn't know what I was doing. And then later on, when I realized, you read the instructions, you get what's going on, then you're kind of okay. I don't think anybody is, nobody wants to retcon the story. Nobody wants to change history. Maybe you do. I don't know. I don't. I think it's great. I think it's come a long way, and I think it's a teachable moment for the industry. I guess my question at the end of this is, obviously people will ask you what you could have done differently, and I know you answer that in your book in detail, which I think is awesome. So, people need to go out and buy the book. Once Upon Atari, it's awesome. But going back, you were given a short amount of time to produce the game. If you were given a longer period of time, or if you could have reconceived the game, is there anything you would have changed?
Absolutely. Like you say, yeah, I go into that in the book, and it's so here's the way I look at a game is, there's a couple of things going on here. Mm-hmm. One is the idea of, you're right, it's more to ask of someone to learn to play a game, right? And most people didn't do that. Mm-hmm. And, with any new medium, whenever a new medium, because that's one of the things that was so pioneering video games, the way I looked at it was creating a new medium. I was there at the dawning of a new medium. And you don't see that many times in your life usually, right? So that was huge, and it was exciting, and I loved it. But the thing is, usually when people launch a new medium, the first thing they do is replicate the successes in previous media. That's the first thing they do. That's why porn is usually the first successful product on any new kind of thing that comes out, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. There wasn't much porn on radio per se. When TV came out, then when you could have videotapes and you have DVDs, whatever, porn leads the way, right? And the internet is no exception. But so video games, the dawning of video games really is coin-ops, right? Coin-ops were the first disseminated video games. And so coin-ops were video games. That's what it was. So when home games came out, the first thing they did was try to copy popular coin-op games. It makes sense. It's a smart thing to do. There's nothing wrong with it. But the thing is, I'm usually looking at what we're not doing, or what could we do, or what's off. I don't like doing what people say, oh, this is what we should do. I think, what can we do? And would that be interesting? And then let's find something really interesting and let's do the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And so the thing about home games, see, coin-op games, Nolan Bushnell had this saying that, easy to learn, tough to master was the short version of it. And that's a great philosophy for coin-op games. You need something that's going to pay off the first quarter and the 100th quarter, right? Mm-hmm. But for a home game, people put all their quarters in right up front, and that's it. And then they're stuck with it. Right? So once they have that, they still want to get value for their money. So the question is, can you ask more? Can you demand more of them? Most people didn't. Most people didn't want to. I felt, yes, I think they're motivated to get value for what it is. If I can make it tough to learn, tough to master, I can make a deeper game. Mm-hmm. I can create a bigger game experience. And I think a lot of times in more complex ways, and it seems simple in here, but when I try to put it out to other people, they're like, it's not as simple as it sounded in your head. and that's true. But so I wanted to do games that demanded more of the player in terms of learning, but provided a deeper, a bigger, and a richer gaming experience. That's what I was going for. Then with Raiders of the Lost Ark, I had 10 months to work on. E.T., I had 5 weeks to work on. So with E.T., just the idea that I got something that it is a done, playable, debugged game by and large. So what I always say with E.T. is I'll put it up against any other 5-week development on the VCS, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's another. You bring up a good point. I want to get back to this, but you did an interview with Patrick Hickey Jr. for his book, Minds Behind the Games. And I've read this. And speaking of the 5-week thing, I don't mean to step on you, but it's important for people to understand what 5 weeks means in the video game world. Mm-hmm. And in his book, he has the best definition of E.T. I've ever read. He says the best video game ever made in 5 weeks.
Thanks.
And, that puts it in perspective. That's unbelievable to me. The one question sort of that bridges off of that, I guess, is the fact that another Spielberg license that you did. I mean, you did Raiders first, okay, and that was a movie that debuted on what was it, June 12th of '81, and then the game after 10 months it came out November of '82. Okay, so they gave you 10 months in that instance. A year later, and by the way, that game sold over 1 million copies, as have all your games, by the way. Awesome. But in the instance of E.T., what I don't understand is the same scenario. E.T. movie comes out on June 11th, '82. And then negotiations for the movie right or the game rights go into July of '82. And then they say, okay, great. Now we need it in 5 weeks. Why is it that in the first scenario, they say, all right, look, we don't have to hit the Christmas deadline. Just make a good game. 10 months, great. Then they do what they did. What? Why?
Okay, good question, actually, and nobody's really asked me that before. So, but the reason is, one of the things you have to remember is that Raiders of the Lost Ark was the first movie to game conversion. So they didn't know what they were getting into. They didn't know what it was. There wasn't much expectation. It's like, let's give this a shot and see what happens. And it was going to take a while. It wasn't going to make the first Christmas. But when they got Raiders out, they realized how it was going, and they thought, hey, this movie thing, this is a good idea. This really works. It works because you can hit it with the ad blitz and make it the target for a Christmas market, though. So the reason there was only 5 weeks was because they felt they had to hit the Christmas market. This was pre-internet, right? So you can't drop the game and then drop point fixes and updates and things like that.
Right.
You have one shot at putting the game out, and you run like a million or millions of copies of it, and that's what's there. That's it. It's never getting updated. So in order to hit a Christmas market, you've got to have a game on the shelf sometime in early November, which means it has to be manufacturing at the beginning of September, which means on July 27th, we have 35.5 days, okay, to deliver the game to manufacturing to make the whole, for want of a nail, the shoe is lost. For want of a shoe, the horse, and all that stuff. You back it all up, and that's where it goes. But I never finished answering. I know I go on and on.
I'm sorry. I just had to, when you say
it's
5
cool.
weeks to make a game, that is astounding to me.
It's totally cool, but I think it's important to finish answering the one question you asked me about what would I do differently with ET, because at the core of it, there's a lot of interesting ways to look at ET, which I go into all over the place, right? But at the root of it, the ET committed a fundamental sin of video game design. And what that is that it's okay to frustrate a player, but you should not disorient a player, right? And to me, that's a fundamental rule of video. Games are all about frustration, right? Yeah. I mean, you have to have frustration in a game, because if there's no frustration, there's no satisfaction for overcoming challenges and winning, right? So a game has to be tough enough to be frustrating. But what's frustration, right? Frustration is, I understand what I'm trying to do, but I can't seem to do it. That's frustration. Disorientation is, I don't know what the hell is going on. It's like, I thought I knew where I was and what's going on, and now suddenly I have no idea what's going on. That's disorientation. Right. So, games where you're trying to develop a skill and get better at shooting or better at targeting or better at moving or locomoting through or whatever, as you build skill, you overcome challenges, and it's satisfying, and you get a dopamine hit, for moving forward in the game, and it's all good. But the way I put it sometimes is that, like, the difference is frustration is I can see where the cookies are, but I can't reach them. That's frustration. Disorientation is I take a step into the kitchen to get a cookie and I find myself in the garage. That's disorientation. And the thing is, there's too many places in ET where I suddenly, because of a series of events that happens very quickly in the game logic, I do one thing and I'm suddenly in this other place. And because I don't understand the game world enough yet, I don't get what's happening. And for new players, that's very frustrating. And it's not just frustrating. That's just, it's hard to deal with. It's just too much. It's overkill in terms of what I want to deal with. And I get that. So the first thing that I would do is reduce disorientation. I would make it so you never jump screens and fall in a well instantly. I would make it that when you come out of a well, you cannot fall back. See, another thing is when you do a game in 5 weeks, where's the gameplay, right?
Yeah.
You got to find gameplay somewhere. So the gameplay that I envisioned was that having a character of a certain size fitting through nooks and crannies, trying to learn to navigate that accurately, that was going to be the game challenge. That was the gameplay. But the problem with it was the graphics were good enough and people were familiar enough with the property that they kind of bought into it. So the idea that a square on the screen, when one corner of the square touches this other block, that something happens in a game, people get that. The idea when E.T. touches a pit with the top of his head and he falls in, that doesn't make sense. So I was doing it in game logic, and people actually, because I never thought I was in any danger of having, on the 2600, of having people interpret stuff as real. I mean, I just thought, I never worried about that. I thought, you got to be kidding me, right? But that's where it went. And people looked at stuff and said, well, that doesn't make sense. But it only didn't make sense because they were so bought of what was going on. So in some ways it was too good to pass for what it was, at least graphically. And that credit goes to Jerome Demurit, the late Jerome Demurit, because this is my good friend and guy I've known for many, many years, except he died a few years ago.
Right.
And, but he did all the graphics for E.T.
That's one of the things I thought was most impressive about E.T. is that if you compare it to other 2600 games at the time, I mean, some of the sprite design, like the scientist and who is it, the
detective, I believe,
the doctor, whatever, who's the FBI agent, the two main characters, they look great in that game. They are some of the best two moving sprites in almost any 2600 game. Like, it looks impressive to me. I don't know. I always thought that was really cool. So yeah, kudos to Jerome.
Yeah, and Howard, just to kind of, because I was just playing it before the show started too, and I was just playing, like, I was just playing it all week, as a matter of fact, too. And I'm like, okay, I can see where the frustration comes in at, you know what I mean? So it's like, all right, yeah, it's a little bit, like I said, disorientation. I was, as far as like switching screens or whatever, I'm like, okay, all right, hold on. I remember one point in, I forgot what movie it was. I think it was the Angry Video Games Nerds, the movie. It was saying like, hey, if you look at the arrow, like as far as where it's pointing at, and you kind of, E.T. jumps to another screen, you got to remember that specific screen, you know what I mean? You gotta, because if you fall into that hole in that spot, you know what I mean, you're screwed. And so I'm like, okay, I understand. Now I want to ask you this too, because it was frustrating for a lot of people. How did Steven Spielberg approve of it? Like, what was he like how, when he was, I know he had to play it for I don't know how long he played it for, but again, how did he approve such a game? Or was he frustrated as well too?
He played it for 45 minutes, if that. Half hour, 45 minutes, and he approved it because he knew about Raiders. He really liked Raiders. That's why he wanted me to do it. But Steven Spielberg had 22 reasons to approve the E.T. game at the time he did, because he was getting $22 million for the license if the game goes and runs. And so he was well motivated, and I relied on that. That was important. But he also, I think he started to play it some, and he kind of got it, and it was okay. He wasn't, and there's people who like the game. I mean, I don't cry or whine about the game, right? A lot of people don't like the game, and I get that. And I never argue with a player if they have an authentic opinion, right? If they've played the game and this is what they think, I never tell a player, no, you really did like the game, when they didn't like it.
Right.
But, Spielberg was a real gamer. I mean, he liked to play games, and he was into it, and he was able to get the hang of coming out of the pits and moving around just in like a half an hour. And he really was playing the game. I don't think he won the game. He didn't play all the way through the game, and he did not have an extensive play interaction with the game. But he played it some and sort of checked it out, and he was happy with it. So that's how it got approved.
I think for
I'm
me,
not saying that was a super thorough approval, and I want to be absolutely clear about something. I am not blaming Steven Spielberg for the issues with E.T. Far be it from me, right?
But I think for me, when I was watching the documentary piece on Netflix, and you were taking us through, we were going through your vision of you sitting in the office and you're sweating bullets. To me, I think the reason why you're like, hey, it's all good, because of the fact you achieved something that, who can say they achieved? You did that within a matter of weeks.
Yes.
Compared to some of these gamers, developers out here, God bless them, but they're going through all this code. You did it within a matter of weeks, and you met the deadline, and Spielberg was happy with it. I know for you, it was like, for you, that was a moment of, you know, had the cape on the back and like, yes, I'm indestructible. And to me, that speaks in volumes, because I sat there and I was watching and I was like, when you were talking about it, you were taking us through, you know, you're like, I had 5 weeks, I went home and I was trying to figure it out. And I just said to myself, oh my God. It's like, you know, because we've all had those moments of meeting a deadline in life, whether it's our job, whether we're trying to accomplish working on a film, writing a book. And so the fact that you took us through that, and there are a lot of people out there that whether you realize it or not, you inspired. Because to me, that was inspiring. Just to see you do that, just to see you bring that all together was very inspiring. So again, I definitely understood. And I love the fact that you're very confident about it. And it makes me feel good because, again, seeing that to me, watching that and then seeing everything that you've accomplished, to me, that was the stepping stone for me to watch you do that. And to me also to see that, well, this man has accomplished so much. Look what he did within a matter of weeks. To me, that was a stepping stone. To me, watching you go through that. So I really, really felt for you during that time, especially when you're in his office and he ended up liking it. And he didn't just play it. He played it for, like you said, for a matter of minutes. So to me, watching that was like, wow, it was very inspiring, very inspiring.
One of the words you use,
thank you.
Use a word, you just used a word, Howard, a moment ago. You said about blame. And that's the most important part of your book, is that you do not place blame. You tell an honest story. It just tells the honest to God, real history of what really happened there at Atari. Your attitude about it is awesome, but you're very factual and you're very, I mean, you're humble about it, but you're honest. And I don't think that you go to place blame, but you say, hey, look, A, B, and C did occur. These things actually did happen. You say about the game taking 5 weeks to conceive it, produce it, and out the door. I assume that was the quickest turnaround for any 2600 game, past and present, correct? I mean, that before that, it had never been done.
By far.
Do we even know what the second fastest game ever produced was? Like, what did anybody come close to that after you? Did, you know,
right.
5 weeks? That's.
I mean, games typically took, 6 months, maybe 5 months or 6 months, sometimes 7, 8 months. It was not uncommon. I don't know if anybody did anything in less than 3 months. I haven't heard of anything like that. I mean, nobody ever came close to this. But on some levels, you could also say it wasn't a full development because it lacked the rumination time and the tuning time. So I didn't really have time to do. I had to deliver first playable, and that's the way it was going to go. So that's what E.T. was. In some ways, you could say that the goofy thing about E.T. is that I delivered 100% of my concept. And you would say, well, if you delivered 100% of your concept, that doesn't sound so bad, does it? But it's really a tragedy when you deliver 100% of your concept, because if you start off with a design concept and you end up delivering exactly 100% of that concept, that means your concept never improved during the development. And on good products, the things you learn along the way get fed back in to improve what the original design was, so you're shooting for a better target. That never happened on E.T., and I do regret that.
And I think it's important to mention too that, you talk about the coming age of the internet and how all of a sudden it was chic to like dogpile and hater culture and everything. And man, is that ever true? It's just almost like that pendulum effect, and that, looking back through history, we see things differently. And the initial guttural reaction was to compartmentalize these games and say, okay, these are the worst because, I need clickbait. I need people to make sure they watch my video. I see a lot of claims out there about E.T. being the worst. I see a lot of claims out there about Yars being the best. One indisputable thing is I have never seen anybody or heard anybody ever say, and I think this is an important distinction, nobody has ever said Howard Scott Warshaw was a bad designer.
No. Yeah, right.
No one.
Right, true.
Prior to E.T., you were batting 1,000. So it's impossible for anybody to go out there and claim, yeah, he didn't know how to make a game. Clearly you did. Very clearly. So I think that's sort of indisputable. I do have to one question though.
Yeah, go ahead, Sid, because
I don't want this to be a rehash of everything that's in your book, because I want people to go out and buy this book because it's incredible. It's really good. Once Upon Atari, it's fantastic. So I don't want to rehash everything you talk about in your book. Couple things. On the cover, this is like my favorite picture of you. This is awesome.
Yeah.
You're wearing you're wearing the caricature Yar's Revenge shirt, and underneath it says "How weird." I have to ask, do you remember who gave you that nickname initially? I know you got it while you were at Atari, right? Who
Actually,
specifically came up with that?
people called me How Weird throughout my life, many occasions. But I think it was actually my girlfriend at the time used to call me How Weird, and she was the one who got that together. It was the woman I was dating at the time, very cool woman who actually worked at Atari, and she for my birthday was what that was all about, and she got one of the graphic designers to do that caricature. Nice. And then she had the t-shirts made up and she distributed them to everybody in the department. So one day, and this was during the ET project, on my birthday, I came in one day and everybody is wearing these shirts except me. And it's like, what the hell is going on? That was just awesome. The coolest thing to see. And yeah, that was so, but How Weird was just, it's a byproduct of who I am. Yeah. People say, is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? I say the glass is too large, right? Yeah. I'm always looking for the unexpected result, which is what made me perfect for Atari, right? Because when you give me a hardware and say, this is what we do with this hardware, I start thinking, well, what can we do with this hardware that you didn't say, that you're not thinking of? I want to show you something cool that you didn't anticipate, that you didn't expect. I always want to do that. That's just me. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry, you were cutting out.
For some people that's fun, but for some people that's weird, because weird is a catch-all term that describes a lot of different stuff. I'd also like to come back to the blame thing, but we can do that later. Come on.
No, go ahead.
What do you want to say?
Do it.
Oh, please.
No, this is your show. This is your show, so we're listening.
No, it's your show. I'm just living in it. I got to tell you, I am breathing good air here. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm just fan, and I'm geeking out. I'm just a big fan. So I always want to, so I'm thinking like, what's he never been asked before?
Real quick, Sid, because I mean the chat is like blowing up right now. And the chat is actually praising you, Howard, too, man. They love you, man. They say it's a privilege to actually have you here. One question I wish to ask you from the chat from Marquita Robinson on Facebook, and she says even during the your time that you had to do the ET for those 5 weeks, how did you not go insane? Now I remember that you had a excerpt in I forgot what documentary that you said that even like you say living conditions, like you had to bring your computer home. You had to bring your whole work home with you. You know what I mean? Every time you would go out to dinner, you was thinking about coding. Every time you was driving, you was thinking about coding, that you almost got into an accident, whatever. How did you not go insane?
Okay, so Marquita, what I want to say is that is a great question, but that question contains an assumption, a presumption. And that presumption is that I did not go insane. And I am not saying that I did not go insane. I think that you have to be a little crazy to try and do what I did in the first place. And when it comes to a little crazy, I am all there, right?
Yeah, right.
So it's a challenge to do a video game, but to do a video game in a ridiculously short amount of time, when that was presented to me, I was like, yeah, I'm all in because I need a challenge. I want to do something that's impossible to do. I want to see if I can make it happen. And by the end of that project, I was a little insane and I was definitely burned out. I was a shell for a while. Mm-hmm. And so the process of doing that did drive me crazy to some degree. I don't know how much the game suffered from that because I think I got pretty good value for most of the time that I spent working on it. I mean, I got stuff done. I moved through. I did deliver the concept I set out to do. But along the way, there was increasingly people were saying, hey, how about this? How about that? How about this? And as it got later in the project, I became very brittle and a little charred. I was just like so burnt out that I just couldn't handle it. I would actually snap back at people. And that's something I don't do.
Right.
I mean, I make some snide comments at times. I will cop to that now and then. But I mean, just to snap at people, that's not me. And I was riding a little too close to the edge and maybe a little over. And by the end, I was definitely paying the price. So thank you for that question, because I'd have to say the answer is I didn't quite get through it and
Right.
not go insane.
Right.
So
Also,
let me ask you this, Howard. What was some of the life, working at Atari, what was some of the life lessons you learned, whether it's the pros or cons? What did you, as far as like working there, because we all had different chapters in our life. So this was Atari was a chapter of your life. What was the life lesson you learned from it? Whether it was good or bad, what was your life lesson from that?
Great question. I mean, there are a number of life lessons I got at Atari.
Okay.
One is don't sell out your goals too easily, right?
Mhm.
If you think you want to do something, check it out and pursue it and see it, because when we pursue our goals, we're not just meeting specifications or requirements. We're getting a good measure of who we are and what we're capable of. And I think if we don't ask a little more of ourselves at time, we don't find out there is more of ourselves.
Right.
And so I learned that. I also learned that I cannot survive on either tech or creativity alone. I need both. I just need both. So that's not a general life lesson. That's a lesson I learned for just me. But the lesson that grows out of that is, like know thyself.
Right.
Dig yourself is another way to put it. If you're hip to who you are and you get where you're at, it's much easier to place yourself in a position of best advantage. And really, in life, to me, that's the big name of the game. Is like when you're there. Atari was a tremendous opportunity for a lot of people. Some people took full advantage of it. Some people didn't. So, some people say success and luck in particular, is when skill meets opportunity.
Mhm.
Right. So you have to, when you hit an opportunity, you have to have the skill base to take advantage of it and convert. So the next step beyond that is, okay, so I suspect I have a skill level, but I haven't tried it. So where do I gamble? Where do I extend myself? And that was another lesson I learned, was don't be afraid to try and put yourself out there. If you fall short, that's the way it goes. The question is, what if we don't make it? The question is, what if we do? And those are things that happened to me at Atari that I took in for sure.
Right. Facts. There's a really another good question for you from on Twitch. The name Pashas Niles. He actually, guys, it's a good question, which I'm actually interested in. He says, "What's your take on?" I don't know if you're familiar with game jam culture. Game jam culture is pretty much when it's like a contest where a bunch of collective people, like usually game developers, programmers, will come in and they will have they will make a game from scratch. Usually, it's a contest that takes place like from 24 to 72 hours. I don't know if you've.
Oh yeah, I've done movie competitions like that. Go ahead.
Okay. So what's your take on game? He just want to know what's your take on game jam culture, given the aptitude that you did it early on, basically.
Well, I love that. Okay, because I did it as a desperation move. What these people are doing is they're doing it as an expression of their real passion and desire. At least that's the way I take it. That's my take on it. So any kind of jamming. It's like, if you're out there, if you have something you love to do, and when it comes to creative projects, I think we all understand the idea, right? That nobody ever finishes a project. You just abandon it, right? There's some point where working on this is no longer the thing I need to do because I got this other thing I need to start paying attention to.
Right.
That's when I'm done. Okay. So any creative project can go on virtually indefinitely. The idea of people who try to say, okay, what can I do in 48 hours? What can I do in 72 hours? And that is the ET experiment, right? It's an inversion of thinking. And here's the inversion I'm talking about, because I think this is an important concept. At least I think so. And what that is that usually with creative projects, the free variable, what we call the free variable, is quality. And I'm going to work on this game to achieve a certain level of quality, and I'm going to see how long that takes. Okay. So the dependent variable is like the time. The free variable is, the quality. And what you do is you flip that. And instead of saying we're going to make a game that's a certain quality and see how long that takes, this thing of like, we're going to do something in a certain period of time and see how good we can make it. That was the thought inversion I had to go through for ET, where the priority is not the game quality, the priority is the time period. And jams like the 48-hour film festivals and game jams and things like this, I have a lot of respect for that, and I think it's great because anything that you develop in that time period, You can then, there's no rule that says you can't touch this anymore after that.
Right.
You can always go back and improve it and work on it. But how many people sit around and say, oh, here's a cool idea. I bet this would be neat. And that's the end of it, right? When you get people who commit to a jam, what you have is people who are passionate, who are excited, who want to make something happen, and they make something happen.
Right.
And nothing happens if you don't make it happen. I know that sounds stupid, but it's really an important concept, is that, if we don't get off our ass and actually do something and actually try and and force ourselves to bring something to the screen, in any form, then we don't go anywhere.
Preach.
How many wonderful products were lost because they weren't started? And this is all about people starting, and maybe they wind up with crap, maybe they don't, but a lot of these projects wind up in a place where they end up becoming really viable products. And were it not for these festivals and people having a limited window to really pour themselves into it, those might be one of those projects that everybody says, yeah, that'd be cool, but who's going to get to it? When are we going to do that? I'd rather just go party out this weekend. It's like, so I think it's like an incubator for entrepreneurs, right? This takes creative, productive people and gives them a chance to really test themselves. And when you test yourself, you get good grades a lot of the time, and you find out, you learn stuff. And so I'm a big fan.
Excellent. You know what? I got one more question from chat, and thank you so much, Chad.
I hope that wasn't too wordy.
No, that was beautiful.
No,
that was beautiful. So thank you for the people on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube for sending. I mean, you guys are flooding with chat. So I got one more question now for now, because I know everybody's going to pretty much flood in. From Sam Hain on Facebook, he says, was there a game that you wanted to do, but the 2600 hardware at the time couldn't handle it? If so, with the new methods of programming homebrews for it now, would you ever decide to finish said game?
That is really funny, because on some levels, every game I tried to do, the 2600 wouldn't handle it. So
right.
It was always trying to compromise, to shoehorn the thing in. But when it comes to like games that I had that I didn't do, there is a game that I have. There's a Yar's Revenge sequel I was going to do that in some ways is almost a prequel if you're story-wise. But there was a Yar's Revenge sequel I had planned, and I had it designed, and I've had this design in my head and on some paper for many, many years. I have never seen this gameplay done. And this isn't a tough thing to do. It would be a tricky thing to make it look spectacular, but the basic gameplay is very doable on the 2600 hardware. And, people always ask me, what would you go back and update ET? Or would you do something? Would you redo ET and improve it now? And I'm like, nah, ET's done.
Yeah.
ET is done. What I would do is I would get back on there and do this Yar's Revenge sequel. I would get together with a homebrew. I'm still thinking that. I might Kickstarter something and put something together so I could afford to pay someone to sit down and do the programming, and I can give them design and guide it through. And I think that game would be a very cool game. The only thing I can't do is call it Yar's because I don't own that property, but maybe it would be HSW's Revenge. That might be a good title for it.
Nice. That's awesome, man. That is awesome. Seriously. I mean, like I remember even, just like I know the game is getting like as far as like ET goes, I know, like I said, what the the community says, and another thing what people say like Ernest Klein, and then which called James Rolfe, and they talk about some. This is a good game, you know what I mean? It's just the like I said, it's just people that don't understand or it's just just don't give it enough time, or like what Ernest Klein just say that like did you play it? Nah, so like for me, like being the youngest gamer here, being the fourth generation, right? If in my opinion, it's a great game. I mean, it's a game that I'm like, what I need to kind of get familiar with. I mean, I ain't gonna say it's like bad or good. I gotta just get familiar with the game and find new ways. And as a matter of fact, that leads to my next question too. Howard, is that do you think with I know the early times, like I said, when you created these games and all that too, which is like the beginning of people's first take on just computer games itself, do you think that it would have received better in our time now that we have like as far as like for us that grew up into video games, that for us that take a lot of challenges, man, that likes competitive games or just games that are so hard that a lot of us gamers now, especially young gamers, would love to take challenges like this. Do you think you would have been received better in our generation compared to, when it first came out?
That's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good question because it's a hard one. And, would it be received better? I think if I were to do that game today, I would do a game that would be probably well received, because I think at the core of this game is a treasure hunt mechanic.
Yeah.
And treasure hunt is a great way to play a game. It's also, tell you the truth, I mean, if I think about gaming today, what I think of is what I used to think of before I got into computers, but I used to think about computer games, even though I had no intention of dealing with them. Multiplayer interactive.
Mm-hmm.
That computers as a gaming platform is one thing, but computers as a host for human interaction, I think that's really where real great gaming is at, and we have that now. So the idea of a larger scale team competitive treasure hunt goal, like not to steal the flag, but find or build your objective before the other team does, and in a way that's interactive, so we're stealing their parts and they're stealing ours. I think I could do a game like that probably would be well adapted. The thing about, the other problem with E.T. was I didn't want to just do a game, I wanted to innovate, because every game I do has to be groundbreaking. That's my big thing. I want to do something groundbreaking. Yars was, Raiders was. With E.T., there were a few groundbreaking things. I mean, one thing that E.T. did that I don't think anybody had done before was context-sensitive power-ups,
mm-hmm.
essentially, right? The idea that when you're in a different part of the screen, you have a different power than you do in other areas. That was a thing I did for convenience, but I don't think people had done that before. And the other thing is it has a 3D world. I think E.T. is the first game with a 3D world. The game is played on a cube, and that cube works, and whatever screen you're on, what's going on in the other screens, where to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a real three-dimensional world. And I think that was a little funky for people. What people used to tell me a lot is like, I'm a little bit ahead of the curve, is that I'm asking a little more of players than most people are used to putting in. And, but if you read Brian would say, read the manual, and it's all there. It's all good.
Yeah,
I do that. I tend to demand more of people than maybe sometimes they want to give, and that has been a little tricky at times for me.
And that's funny that you say that too, because it's like, I know, again, these gamers now, these first generation gamers that are introduced to your game right now are getting, they're trying to figure out this world. They're trying to figure out the 3D world. For us gamers that's been, now, it's like we're used to that. We know the ins and outs of it. It's like, maybe, again, I just want to see what people think about this game now. It's like, this game is pretty all right. I liked it, maybe because we already know the concept of 3D worlds. We know such things like that. And that leads to my next question. Actually, no, that leads to the Facebook question from Bob Aquilino on Facebook. He says, where do you see video games in the next 5 to 10 years, Howard?
Okay, so and that's a very interesting topic, Bob. I think that where I really see it going is that what we're seeing is a blurring between gaming and life, right? The gamification,
mm-hmm.
gamification of this, gamification of that. Look, I got my little, Fitbit,
mm-hmm.
and I'm out there making my numbers. It's like, and I could do a few more steps today. I see how it goes. And so I think we're trying to use gaming frameworks to make long, traditional, but tedious things more engaging. There's also going to be this flip side of things we used to do for entertainment are going to become more a part of our lives on that level too. And I think VR is one thing that's pretty big, and it's getting better, and it's kind of huge. But my money's on AR. Okay, augmented reality, because it's one thing to escape into a whole separate world, and that's cool, and there will always be a place for that, right? And sometimes that place is called dreaming, right?
Yeah, right.
But AR is about taking the actual world I'm in and being able to dick with it in a way that's really kind of cool, and I want to pump it up, and I want to pimp my world is what they ought to call it, right?
Yeah, right.
And that's the thing, is that AR, I think that's where it's at, and that's the thing where if I, and they've been doing this for a long time. And one of the first applications was there were people in Japan, I think, who put together this system where you have goggles and you were playing Pac-Man in the street. Mm-hmm. And as you go up the street, they knew where the dots were. And as you look, you could see the dots. And Pokemon Go was a version of that. You can find stuff here and there, and there it is. Augmented reality, But at the same time, augmented reality is like, oh, I go out and I need to fix my car. So I go out with my goggles and I'm looking at what's going on in the car, and I get something that shows up that says, use this tool to loosen this screw here, and go and do the work and fix it. It's going to make everybody capable in ways that people haven't been before. And that's why I say that the same kind of mechanics and things that you do in entertainment, in playing a game, are going to become more and more the kinds of things we do to make our life work and do things that we need to do on a practical level. You know, anybody could be a chef, anybody could be a mechanic. You know, there's a lot of things that people could do that they're not able to do right now, that augmented reality makes a lot simpler. And so I think there's this merging of gaming and practical life, and they're both heading towards this convergence, and that's with like really nice AR glasses. And that's where I see it going.
Well, you know, bouncing off of that, for myself, and I've been wanting to ask you this question, as someone who works in the therapy field, as a person who's diagnosed with post-traumatic stress and deals with anxiety and depression, video games for me has been a big help. What is your take on it for mental health? How do you feel about video games being a part of that therapy to help, not just seeing a therapist or getting the mental therapy done through a therapist, but having video games be a part of that? How do you feel about that? What is your take?
I'm open to it. I'm very big with it, right? I mean, let's face it, games have been used as a scapegoat or a whipping post for a lot of people to blame a lot of problems on. And there are problems that come about, but the thing is, people who are addicted to video games are the same people who are addicted to gambling and sex and a lot of things like that. Those are what we call behavioral addictions, right? Where the addiction isn't inherent in the thing. Like with heroin, the addiction is inherent in the substance. Any human being who takes some heroin for a while becomes addicted. But with gambling, sex, games, things like that, many, many people engage with these things and don't get addicted, but some people do, which means the addiction is not in the activity itself. The addiction is in the addict. They're bringing something to it that's creating the addiction. Okay. So that said, now there's a lot of blame and there's a lot of focus on how do we get over video game addiction? And now with the pandemic and stuff, a lot of people are receding to games because it is something to do in a restricted kind of do space, right? We just can't do that much stuff. Games are a logical place to go. But games have also been on the positive side of therapy like forever. Stroke victims, back when I was making video games at Atari, that was a big thing, that a lot of stroke victims, they were using regular video games to rebuild eye-hand coordination and just, you know, as sort of occupational therapy. So it's always been there. And now games are much more sophisticated. There's a lot of benefits you get to playing games. So, and when you talk about PTSD, that's a topic that is near and dear to my heart as a therapist, because I got a whole theory about that. I don't want to go too deep into that right now, but let me just say this about that, because I think it's an important message, is that when we talk about PTSD, everybody knows it's a bad thing. Nobody wants PTSD, right? And we talk about post-traumatic stress and how bad that is and the problems it is. Well, here's the thing. What's really a trauma, right? A trauma, people think of a trauma as a bad thing. People are very into judgment, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. But the thing is, trauma is something that all it does is it prevents you from doing your usual stuff. Something that 100% interrupts any natural ongoing habits or patterns. That's what a trauma is. Now, whether I become traumatized and what happens to me with that, some people do, some people don't. There's a lot of different things. But one thing's for sure is when there's a trauma occurs, the real deal is that I can't go on living my life the way I'm used to living it. So what happens is I start to build compensatory or coping skills, right?
Right.
And I have a name for that. I call that PTRE, right? Which I call, there's a thing called the positraumatic response, which is what I focus with. People who have trauma don't need to know it's bad. They're usually pretty familiar with the downside, right? But there's some good stuff with it too, right? And the good stuff is that because we are almost infinitely adaptable and we're always striving and trying to achieve. So when we hit a trauma, what happens is we start developing skills to deal with it. And this is what I call PTRE, which is positraumatic resource enhancement. because, and what happens is, so some people learn to deal and cope with what's going on. And then those skills that they develop, they say, that's like part of the whole trauma thing. And I don't like dealing with that because that reminds me of the stuff, and they throw it away. So here's this new skill set they develop that they don't use. If you look at a lot of super successful people, you will find a lot of them have trauma in their background. They are people who at some point were traumatized. And what they did was they took their skill set, their traumatic enhancement, and they found a way to use it productively. And when you take something that's as intense as something you develop to deal with a trauma, that's high energy, high output stuff. Mm-hmm. And when you find a way to take that away from dealing with trauma and put it into productive action in your life, now you've got something that is super positive and very helpful and very useful. So what I say, so how do games do that? Games help us cultivate problem-solving skills.
Yes.
Games teach us ways of thinking about problems, and games teach us to find new ways of thinking about it. People like me create puzzles in games that don't solve like the way things usually do, to make you have to rest, stretch, and think and reach. And they give us larger inventories of approaches and ways to deal with things. Okay, so I think these are very positive things that can be very helpful. And people who relegate these skills exclusively to games are missing a big trick, right? Because if we take the things that we learn and we turn those back into what we're doing in the rest of our life, it can actually make us much more successful. Yeah, because games are, I'm just saying, yes, games are an outlet for addictive behavior, like any kind of thing is, but don't miss the upside too. They can be very helpful. A lot of people learn and train to do them. And let's face it, most simulation, a lot of training, simulation training devices and things like this have their origins in video games, because that's where a lot of the fast simulation tech, that technology came from.
Yeah, because I find when I go through my moments, and I'm having a bad day or having a traumatic day, I find like when I'm playing video games is a major outlet for me. I've mentioned this in my when I'm in my therapy sessions with my therapist and all. I've talked to them and told them how, and I when I'm having one of those days, I just sit down and I'm just playing because it takes my mind, and like you said, it helps me solve problems. It's trying to help me figure out a story. It's trying to help me navigate and then try to apply it somewhat in my everyday life. So yeah, but that was really, really, really good, because you were reading my thoughts. I'm like, wait, he says like reading my thoughts.
And so along those same lines, Howard, it seems you're uniquely qualified to answer this age-old question, and it's not meant to be like a gotcha question, but really, can you speak to the correlation, if there is one, between video games and violence? That's always been the thing. What say you?
Oh, baby, can I speak to that? Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I think that's a really important point. I mean, a lot of times people are more prone to point out the problems with something than the benefits. I mean, that's just in general, and games take a hit there, which I don't think is deserved. It's true, there are thousands of people that have problems and issues playing video games, but there are billions of people who are benefiting from it. So we need to keep some sense of proportion. But video games and violence, man, have I been through this. I have disrupted therapy trainings, because I have been in things where people start talking about, oh, now we're going to talk about video games. Well, in parenting seminars and stuff, well, you've got to teach your kids not to play games. Don't let them near that, because this is going to ruin them. And look at all the research. I mean, if you look up the research, you will see that the research has been discredited, that Harvard University has discredited most of the studies that say that games inherently create violence. There was, I don't know if it was Dick Cavett or someone who said a long time ago, about it used to be TV is causing violence. What about violence in TV and films? And what they used to say is, if TV and films had that much influence on us, comedy would be breaking out in the streets, right? And it's like, the thing is, when people look at that, what they do is they say, let's go look at violent offenders. And you look at violent offenders, you go, oh, look, they played violent video games. I'll bet there's a causative factor there. Look at that. Well, yeah. Well, by that logic, do you know how many heroin addicts started on milk? Oh my God. Right? So the problem is, if you look at violent people and then you see, what do? where do they seek their entertainment? You're going to find violent themes in everything they do, including their entertainment. Of course, they're going to play violent games. But if you really want to track this statistically, if you want to do it reasonably or accurately, you don't look at violent people and see what kind of games they played. What you do is you look at people who play violent video games and see how many of them commit violent acts. And when you look at it that way, it turns out that the incident, they're roughly the people who do play video games and people who don't play video games, they have virtually the same incidents of violent behavior, except the truth is it's slightly less for people who play games than it is for people who don't. So that's nice. And so the idea that this stirs everything up is just, it's really not true. It's not statistically supported, but it's sexy and it looks right. I was at a seminar where they were presenting examples of horrible violence and things that take place, inappropriate things in video games. And 4 of the 5 examples that they used had never been released. They were things that had been recalled from the market, either released and recalled, or were parts of games that I was familiar with that had never been released. They just found these examples. And it's like, and so I would stand up and say, by the way, what you're presenting is not true and not accurate. So when it comes to dealing with that, in fact, when it comes to dealing with video games in general, to me, parents feel like, oh my God, kids are so involved with their devices and all this stuff, we're losing track. A lot of parents are losing track because they're involved with their devices too, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
The thing is, nobody has more influence in a child's life than parents. They do. But you have to take advantage of that. You have to use it. So what I tell parents is, if you really want to deal with your child's gaming, if you're worried about where it's going, telling them to not play games is a very, very bad idea, in my opinion. Because what happens, okay? I tell my kid to not play games. I'm telling my kid to segregate himself from all of his friends and all of his culture, and that's not going to work. When I tell my kid don't play games, what I'm telling them is don't let me know that you're playing games. Hide it from me. And what that's doing is shutting down the communication between us. And when I shut down the communication between us, that's when I lose influence on my kid. You really want to get involved and you want to help your kid work through this, play games with your kids. Sit down there and be the person who plays games with them. And if you're playing a game that's violent, say, boy, isn't this ridiculous? It's a good thing none of this stuff happens in real life, isn't it?
I love that. I love that.
It's like you can normalize the experience, you can be a part of the experience, or you can sit back and just look at your phone and look up things to do to your kids to protect them from video games. And then, but wait a minute, I got a couple of hits on my Facebook post. And next thing you know, it's an hour or two later and I haven't been talking with my kid. It's like parents tend to accuse kids of the stuff they're doing themselves a lot these days lately. But it works when I do it. It's just a problem when they do it.
Wow.
It's like, what do they say? There's that joke about what's the difference between kinky and perverted sex, right?
Right.
And what they say, the difference is that kinky is what we do and perverted is what they do. It's always worse what other people are doing, even if we're doing it. I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Seriously. I'm so mad that we only have like a few minutes left with you, Howard, man, because I want to go like hours and hours with you, man, seriously. But I mean, one of the final questions, I know each guy has, each of my co-hosts got a final question. Would you ever return to the gaming industry in the future if you had the choice?
I would consider it. I mean, I love doing psychotherapy. This is like the best. This is the only thing I've ever liked more than working at Atari. So I wouldn't give this up, but I would do some consulting in games. I'm not against dealing with games. I just can't go full time back into games. I don't think I can do that, but I'm definitely up for consulting. Also, I do some work with people who are trying to, there's games that want to have a psych aspect and influence. And increasingly I get propositions from people like that about getting involved because I'm someone who has a foot in each world. So it's kind of they're very interesting applications to play with, but yeah, I'd consider it on that level. Absolutely.
Excellent, man. Because I'm thinking, like, I figured with a great mind like you, man, like we definitely need you back, either working for Xbox or PlayStation, man, or just giving those guys a really good history lesson, man. Just so get them straight.
You are too kind. But I will tell you this though, I'm really enjoying chatting with you guys, and if I know we're running out of time now, but that doesn't mean we can't do this again sometime if you guys are up for
definitely.
Absolutely.
And Howard, I want to ask you, like, I'm going to ask my final question. My question is to you, because of someone who's been as creative as you have been, and you've done so many, like, you've achieved so many, like, areas. What advice would you give to those people that are up and coming that want to strive to, whether they want to be a game developer or they want to be an actor or a writer? What advice would you give as someone who's been in these, like, fields? What advice would you give to those people?
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So I think that's really important stuff to cover too. So here's what I would say. When I got into video games, I didn't have any concept of what video games were before I got into it, because I didn't grow up in a world that had video games. It's a very different thing to grow up in a world that has video games and then think about going into video games. I didn't have a big fantasy in my mind of what making video games was like. So I didn't have to deal with that. People nowadays, they grow up just like you have the fantasy of what it's like to be a pro sports player, or, to be anything that you want to fantasize you could be. There's your fantasy idea of it. And in my mind, fantasies work great, right? So there's no reason to think it's not cool and it's not going to go that way. Most people, their fantasy about being a game maker is very different from the actuality of making games. Making games is a lot more brutal than you'd suspect, but it's also can be tremendously rewarding. You just have to not be in it for immediate gratification. Games are all about immediate gratification, right? Game playing. Game making is not about immediate gratification. It is about delayed gratification. So you got to be able to tolerate that, and you got to be realistic about what you're stepping into. But it can be a wonderful, beautiful, and satisfying thing. And let me tell you, there are very few feelings in life like being able to walk into a store or look online at an offering and say, oh man, this thing is getting all this attention and I made that. I was a part of that. This was something that I did, and I'm even in the credits. Oh baby, that is cool. And I don't ever want to undersell that value. I just want people to be real. And that's in therapy, that's what I do. I don't tell people you can't get there. I tell them, let's be realistic about how we go. And that's what I'm saying basically. But that's a good one. Thank you.
Outstanding answer. Love it.
Absolutely.
And Brian, we leave it to you, because we know you got the final question that you want to ask.
It's not a question. I'm gonna reclaim my time, as they say, right? But,
I yield to the gentleman with the Civic.
There you go.
Howard, first of all, thank you. This has been amazing. We've been doing our show now for 4 years, and we started doing this because the three of us, Mark, Eric, and myself, we live in proximity to each other in the Philadelphia area, and we are lifelong gamers, obviously. I mean, you can see behind me here.
By the way, I spent a child in Philadelphia. I thought I was hearing some Philly in there. Yeah.
Oh, really?
My whole mother's side of the family is from Philly, so I spent literally half my childhood in Philadelphia.
Nice.
I love that.
Before Civic, you come back. Seriously, I will get you a cheesesteak. Come back. Seriously.
No, we got to go to Pat's and get a steak. I'm not a whiz guy.
No.
I'm not a whiz guy.
Oh, come on, man. I'm gonna take you somewhere better. I'm gonna take you to somewhere better, man. I got you. But go ahead, Sid.
I'm good with that.
But go ahead, Sid. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. No, that's awesome. So we don't get paid anything. This is non-monetized show. We do this because we love this. We love what we do. Doing this show's opened up a lot of avenues for us to speak to interesting people such as yourself, who we would never normally have any kind of access to. Nobody would look twice at us. So again, thank you for that, for taking the time. More importantly, I have been waiting 45 years to do what I'm about to do. You are the first game designer that's ever been on the show. I hope you're not the last. I hope we don't scare you away. I hope you'll come back. But there's a reason why you're the first. I grew up playing your games, as did many of us here, and you have not single-handedly, but you have immensely influenced the industry. You are one of the pioneers of the hobby, the industry that I love. I love this. I love what you do. I love what developers have created. This is my therapy. This is my heaven on earth. I love every bit of it. I have other hobbies. They've come and gone. but I have been a gamer since I was 5 years old. It has never wavered. I have never thought about walking away from this, and I never will. I know that I will die a gamer. I have met more interesting people through this. I have met some of my best friends through this. It has gotten me through the hardest times in my life. It's been just an immensely important journey for me personally. So I want to sincerely thank you and everybody at Atari and the guys at Intellivision and everybody at Sony and everybody at Xbox, everybody in this industry, the magazine designers that Game Pro and EGM, those guys, the guys at G4, everybody who has done the heavy lifting to build up this industry. You were there during the embryo phases. You were the guinea pigs in this whole thing. And without you, we would not have this. I am very, very acutely aware that we would not have what we have today if it were not for you. I don't know how more sincerely to just thank you from the bottom of my heart for this. This means the world to me. I have met my best friends through this hobby. And there we go, man.
Yeah.
Ryan,
That's all I got.
spectacular.
That's all I got.
Well, that's all I need. I mean, on behalf of like all the developers and everybody who made all this stuff happen, you are so welcome, because it's people like you that made it something to do, right?
Yeah.
If people weren't interested in games, there wouldn't have been anything to do. And I got to say, honestly, there's a lot of ways I would look at what was going on, but I know that growing up as a teen, at least, boredom was something that was really hard for me to deal with. And it was very much at the front of my mind that what I was doing was entertaining people and bringing something to them that I so wished I had when I was growing up. And the idea that it came through and it meant something and it was there, it's right in my heart, man. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really feel it, and I so appreciate what you're saying. So thank you. I really received that, and it means a lot to me.
Thank you.
And before class ends, Howard, man, we want to pass the controller to you. Where can people find your book at? Where can people buy your book? Where can people look at your documentaries? Where can people reach you at?
Okay, so onceuponatari.com is the easiest place to go to connect, and you can get to the book, you can get to the DVD. Also, I have the DVD Once Upon Atari, which is a 4-episode series. Now that is different from the book, Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. And so the book is about my life. When I did the DVD series and then the Atari Game Over movie happened, and I talked with Zach Penn, who was the director of that. And what he said to me is he had watched Once Upon Atari, the DVD, quite a few times as research for what he was doing. And he said, the thing that's really missing here is you, Howard. You're not in this as much, because I'm the host of it, but I didn't put me in it. I was too self-conscious to do that, frankly.
Right.
And when he said that to me, I realized, oh yeah, I knew it. And I had to decide, if you're going to write a memoir, if you're going to put yourself out there, it's not always the easiest thing to do. It takes a lot of courage to expose yourself to the public that way. I mean, sometimes it takes breaking the law to expose yourself to the public, but I'm not going that way. I'm just talking about opening my heart and mind to people and letting them in a little. And that's a tricky decision at times, but I decided to do it. And so these two things work together, because the DVD series is really about what life was like at Atari on a day-to-day basis and the challenges we faced and the fun that we had. The book definitely covers time at Atari, but the book is more my journey through that and how, I changed Atari. I had a huge impact, I guess, on a lot of the stuff that went on at Atari, but Atari changed my life forever. It really just changed the whole course of where I was, who I was, and where I was going. And that's been a very enriching experience. So you come to onceuponatari.com. If your mind is so blown by looking over that stuff that you need help, you can come to hswarshaw.com, which is my psychotherapy website, and I will help you get right. And, people want to contact me. You can see me on Facebook. You can reach me through the websites. There's all kinds of ways to contact me. I'm pretty responsive, or I try to be. But please, people, check out the book, because this book, there's a lot of stuff that's about old video games that's really kind of like a history book, and it's a little dry. And what I did here was, instead of just trying to point out the history, I tried to tell a story that has a lot of historical fact in it. And I hope I delivered something that's just really entertaining and you get some value from it. Mm-hmm. That's been my dream.
Well,
Excellent.
considered accomplished. The book is amazing.
Well done.
The book is amazing.
Thank you so much.
Somebody recently on your site, I think they said, this is the best book I've ever read. And I sat there and I'm thinking like, yeah, I think the case could be made. By far, it's the best video game book I've ever read. It's the best story in gaming history. I love it. So
I'm about to order
people
mine
need,
as soon as
people need to
possible.
grab it.
I have heard people say that anybody who is involved with video games in any way or another,
Yes.
it's a must read for them. And I think that's true.
Trust me, I'm about to order mine as soon as possible, man. So yeah, you got me intrigued.
I am totally good with that.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, class is pretty much dismissed. Before you go, remember that we always have those endgame credits. Make sure that you definitely please share this episode to your gaming buddies, man, your friends and family all around the world, man. Anybody that appreciates gaming culture as we do, man, so they can appreciate this awesome episode that we have for you today. Again, you also can join us on Pass Controller on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube, Instagram. We all over Twitter at PTC Gaming Show. You can email us your questions at ptcgamingshow@gmail.com. And also, we have a community that is just for you gamers. It is called PTC Nation. I don't have my card here, so I'm just reading off the top of my head. Remember that you can always put your gaming memes, stuff like news, polls, whatever you want. If you want to find people to play with, man, if you want to show your appreciation to Howard Scott Warshaw, you can post it on PTC Nation as well too, man. That's right, PTC Nation is just for you so that we can all pass the control together. Dude, Howard, again, thank you so much for being here, man. Seriously, you are awesome, dude.
Thank you all so much. Eric, Brian, Mark, you guys were great, and I would be happy and honored to come back anytime. Just let me know.
That's what I want to hear.
We will. I only got through about two questions.
Seriously. So again, guys, for Civic, for Smoke, for Howard Scott Warshaw, I am McNux, and as always, people, remember to stay safe, stay well, and get good, baby.
Peace and hair grease, y'all. Peace and hair grease.
We good? Good.